Don't spend a lot of time developing something without customer feedback. Put it together quite quickly, try an idea, and then if it doesn't work, I can move on to something else. Always go with an MVP. Keep drip feeding that information, and eventually it might address a pain point that they have.
This is the Education Business Podcast for all founders and business owners in the education sector. This podcast is for you if you have an education business or you're thinking about starting one. That could be tutoring, publishing, holiday clubs. It really doesn't matter. You're in business and you're also in education. But most of all, you're focused on improving outcomes for children in the way you know best, through your business. I'm Claire Riley, co-founder of educational resources website Classroom Secrets, and I'll be sharing how to make your education business bigger, better, and have more impact through my own experiences and also the conversations I have with other founders and business owners in education. The Education Business Podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets, helping you to support your children's learning. Craig, welcome to the Education Business Podcast. Tell us your career story. What has it looked like? How did you come to a point of having an education business? What have been the big markers in the sand that are important for us to know?
Hi, Claire. Thanks for having me. So, career story, nothing unusual really. I graduated in 2006 with a Bachelor of Education degree with ICT and became a class teacher. And then a normal career path, subject leadership, and then that led on to deputy headship and then a headship. The change came in 2021. At the end of the spring term, I left my headship. I led the school through COVID. My mum had died. I thought, do you know what? I don't need to be in school for a little while. But I didn't anticipate at that point that would be the kind of end of me being in school. I just thought I'd have maybe the summer term off that year and go back into schools in September, or maybe the summer and the autumn and perhaps go back in January once I recharged a little bit. But it never transpired. I never thought about running a business or being self-employed. But when I left during that summer term, when I had a bit of time to breathe and a bit of space to think, I started thinking about that September start and people getting ready with kind of Kitsy training and things like that. So I set up a online Kitsy course where staff could come and do their Kitsy Part 1 training, answer some questionnaires, get a certificate if they passed the course. And then that was the school's evidence that they'd done their Kitsy training, which, we all spend a lot of summer preparing. And then once people actually did start buying that, I realized actually there was a market for offering these kind of services to schools. And that was the kind of start of my journey into self-employed and offering services to schools.
So talk us through the next bit then. What happened from there? So you started offering services. I know that that's not the only service that you offer now. So how did that happen? How did you feel about the fact that, oh, wait a minute, I could be self-employed? Was there a moment when you thought, I could be self-employed, this could be a full-time thing? How did you decide what other things to offer teachers and schools? How did you know it was going to be product market fit? Tell us that whole story up to now and all the things that you've offered along the way.
I think once Education Safeguarding actually started to make some sales, that was the platform name for the Kitsy training. So it made me realize that there was a market. People would pay for these kind of things. They didn't have to manage everything in-house. So then I was able to kind of sit back and reflect a little more about being a head teacher, what were my frustrations. And one of the biggest was that I spent too long in my office. So I thought about the other things that I used to have to do and didn't have time to do, I had to do. And I thought, actually, I didn't need to do it. It could be done by someone else, but it needed to be done. So we set up another website, school website audits, and that offered like a full compliance check of your website against DfE requirements. It was time consuming and your website's constantly out of date, but you never have time to sit and go through it. So we provide schools with a report to do that. So a huge time saver. I should add at this point, the one real benefit is I'm able to do these myself. I'm a bit of a learn by doing kind of person. So I built Education Safeguarding myself using WordPress, so it comes free. So everything's been low cost. And it means then that it's easy to try different things. I don't need to spend thousands of pounds getting a web developer to do something for me. I don't have to subscribe to things that are quite costly. And also it means speed. I don't have to then wait weeks or months to work with a team of people or to work with a developer to get something done. So I'm able to put it together quite quickly, try an idea. And then if it doesn't work, I can move on to something else. So that's been a real benefit, having that flexibility And it's been low risk then to that point. So we set up school website audits and that started to go well. I actually met up with a website company to kind of work in partnership to offer that service to their customers for them. And the first meeting, first thing he said was, you need to double your price. I think I was charging something like 99 quid for something that takes me several hours. It's a time consuming job. And it was at that point you started to realize, well, actually, I do need to also value my time. And I think that's a trap a lot of people fall into, is not having the confidence to put an appropriate value on their time. So we still run school website audits, still goes now. Off the back of that, I found that I was writing in a lot of these reports, this is out of date, this is out of date, this is out of date. So it started to make me think again about that awful amount of time that I used to have to spend on policy management. So we set up another website, School Policy Tracker, and that kind of supports school leaders in that Excel spreadsheet of doom. I used to have a colourful spreadsheet on my desk that I didn't really want to spend time looking at. And the result was all my policies were all out of date. It was just so inefficient. So we support schools with that now. The benefit, or where that came from, is it was a lived problem. Both of those things were something that I had firsthand experience of kind of banging my head against the wall to do, or not having the time to do, or feeling the pressure. So that's kind of where those ideas came from. And they've not all been successful. They're the ones that are kind of still going. Education safeguarding, we stopped. I think a lot of people offer Kitsy training, so we were competing with a lot. So in the end, I decided it wasn't really worth as much time as you needed, and fighting against some quite big companies. So we stopped that one. I also tried pupil magazines. I thought it'd be really popular. Essentially it was a writing platform to allow pupils to publish their writing, to give them an audience. I get it's demotivating for people to sometimes to write in their exercise book and the only audience is going to be their teacher. So actually publishing pupils' writing, and also from a school level, it would have made a fantastic kind of evidence base for personal development and things like that for Ofsted. But it's hard work. Actually, schools didn't want it because it was in addition. They didn't have to do it. So that's one thing I kind of learned, whereas school website audit, school policy tracker, they do have to do those things. Publishing pupils' writing, be lovely, but it was time that they didn't need to spend doing. So that was one that kind of we sidelined a little bit. And as you said, we've got a few still going. Actually, I've got 4 websites that are currently running. The next one was SLT AI. And the idea for that came about in January 23, when ChatGPT hit the media, like 185 million others. I signed up for that. And my initial impressions were, wow, this is fantastic. You type this in, see this response appear in front of your face. But then when you actually read it, you realize it didn't know anything about education. So that started to kind of give me an idea, well, what leaders actually need is something like this that knows about the DFE, that knows about Ofsted, that knows about the EF research and things like that. That would be really powerful. So again, because I can do it myself, I actually managed to get my MVP, a minimum viable product. And that's something else I've learned over the last few years, is don't spend a lot of time developing something without customer feedback. Pupil magazines was a good example. I hadn't got any feedback from people. I just thought, this is a great idea. So I spent a bit of time doing it. And actually, I developed something that nobody wanted. Whereas with SLT AI, it was kind of a perfect development journey by mistake, because I built a chatbot that I trained with a huge raft of information from the DFE, from Ofsted, from the EF. So now I had an educational expert as an AI tool. Brilliant, really good. So I shared this to my limited followers on Twitter for free, said, try this, see what you think. And I got a load of feedback really quickly, a lot of positive, a lot of points to kind of consider. And that actually took me off in a different direction, because I could see the kind of things people were asking, the kind of responses they were getting. And I thought, we can make this easier. So we kind of had a bit of a sideways pivot into making it more tool-based rather than just free. So we've done a lot of structuring for people. But as I said, that seems to have been a perfect development journey, by accident, because then the site has been built with the profession. All of the things on there have been built through conversations with school leaders, with people that are sat in the chair at that desk doing that job now. So it comes back to my earlier point. It actually addresses a problem that someone is having, unlike pupil magazines, where actually it was in addition to. SLTAI is support school leaders in things they have to do. So actually there's a need there for it. So that was one thing that came out. And then a couple of weeks ago, we launched another website. Even in Brainwave, I started thinking about, how did I keep on top of things as a school leader? You've got DFE updates, you've got Ofsted updates, you've got union updates, you've got EEF updates and things like that. So we built another site, Headlight it's called, and it kind of amalgamates all of those news sources. So you can select which sources to hear from, and then it uses AI to summarize the articles, tell you why it's relevant to your school, and then give you kind of bullet points from it. So a really good way to kind of synthesize it and put in one place all the information I would need as a school leader. So that's kind of how the journey's happened today. There's been a lot of learning through that, at the very beginning when actually the first bit of money came in, I was like, oh, right, what do I do with this? So I had to learn about kind of becoming a sole trader, where the tax implications, how did I pay tax? Did I need an accountant? As a sole trader, I didn't really. Sole traders are super easy. You can just pay your tax through your self-assessment. So there were those kind of learning curves, but actually, you can start quite soft, I suppose is the right way to put it. And if it were me doing it again, I think that the advice I'd like would have been MVP. Always go with an MVP. Start with a minimum viable product to get some idea. Don't go and spend thousands of pounds and a load of time, months and months, developing something that might actually not be needed, not be wanted. Get your customer feedback. That's really important. And think about real life problems, isn't it? I've been there as a school leader, ed tech products that have been presented by people that have clearly never worked in education, and actually they were trying to put a square peg into a round hole and solve a problem that didn't exist. Whereas I think that the sites that I currently still have, because they've had that longevity, solve a problem that exists. And I think that was one of the key points there.
Do you teach children as part of your business offering? Have you considered using resources from Classroom Secrets? At Classroom Secrets, we're always adding new resources for a range of subjects, and we're keen to hear your suggestions for resources too. We know that you didn't go into business to work more hours than you did in the classroom. You went into business to give you freedom. Let us help with that. Visit classroomsecrets.co.uk to sign up. Craig, such valuable insights there, especially if you're just starting out. Absolutely work on your MVP, make sure that it's something that people want. You talked a lot about lived experience, which is something that I'd had, and also feedback from teachers in classrooms and school leaders. And I actually felt at Classroom Secrets that I didn't start developing the product that people really wanted until I started getting feedback and acting on that feedback. So I completely agree. I had the website, but I didn't necessarily have the products that the teachers wanted until I started listening to what they said and doing some things and putting it out again. Do you think that one is more important than the other, lived experience or the feedback from the market?
It's a really good question. Yeah, I do think one's more important than the other. I think the lived experience gave me the initial ideas because I was able to reflect. But that said, I'm one person, and I appreciate I perhaps work differently to other people, and that's the way the world works. But yeah, the feedback is essential. So I think the lived experience is really useful because actually, I think for me in things like SLT AI, that adds a lot of credibility to the business. I'm not a salesperson. I've actually been there. I use these tools. I'm a chair of governors at the moment. So I do use these tools to support me. So I think that helps in terms of credibility rather than being someone that's actually just never actually been a teacher, never been a head teacher or something like that. But, that's one person's opinion. I'm one person. So having the feedback is essential. As a case in point, completely unrelated to education, but we tried something with a friend of mine who supports fitness coaches in marketing, and it didn't have the success that we wanted. We couldn't get any feedback at all. So people would subscribe and then they'd cancel their subscription and would reach out and go, oh, were there anything you wanted? Was there anything that didn't work? Nothing. So we just didn't know where to go with it. So my weekly webinars and training sessions where I meet our users face to face, and the feature requests work really, really well because they can come and say, I like that. Can it do this? And that's how it's been built up over time. So yeah, I absolutely think both are valuable. Some form of mechanism to get some feedback from users is really important.
When did it start to feel real financially? Like, what was that moment when you thought, oh, wait, I actually could take a salary from this now. This could actually support my lifestyle. I've made it in the sense of creating my own job.
It's a good question. I think the potential showed early on because, as I said earlier on, I didn't anticipate not going back to be a head teacher. But then the kind of kitsy courses sold okay. But actually, it was a realization, well, actually, schools were willing to buy in these services externally. So, how much would I need to get it to work? So then you start to think, and I mean, the website audits did pretty well. I think we charge $195 for a primary school audit. So then I'd kind of start to think, well, okay, what do you need? What do I need to achieve to actually make this a livable wage? Say I need one a school day, 200 a year. It's £40,000, isn't it? Give or take. So actually, it started to feel achievable then. And I think we did manage to do 200 in a year. Maybe we've done like 250 in a year. I can't remember year on year now because we get, repeat customers and things like that. But yeah, when I broke it down into, well, actually, I only need to do one a day. I only need to get a certain amount of schools over the course. The potential showed quite early. When did that actually happen? I think probably 6-8 months into it, it started to, maybe a little longer, perhaps into the first year, it started to get to the point where it was, oh no, this is fine. This is perhaps where we wanted to be with it. And then, of course, the thing that really kind of accelerated, and in fact, my wife left teaching to come and work with me, was SLT AI. And that's a lot easier because I suppose it's a distance thing. So, we do two different things. The website audits are really restricted to my capacity. So if I was going out into school and doing school improvement work and things like that, I'd be restricted to, how much time I physically have. Whereas a service like SLT AI, that's a subscription as a service, it's unlimited really, the potential's there. So it's that actually really then did, well, it was life-changing for us actually. Like I said, my wife left teaching, and that was the thing that really provided that opportunity for us to actually really forge something strong. But, I've waffled a little bit, but back to the kind of point, when did we realize, when did it become real? I think the aspiration was there. Once the school started subscribing to our services or buying our services, it was then actually that you realized, okay, well, actually there is a market for this. People will pay for these things. How much do I need to survive? So actually my goal now is to get to 200 a year, and that's what I need, so then we work towards that and achieve that. And I think it only probably took about a year, but saying that, I think we were one of the only people doing that. So we didn't really enter a saturated market. So maybe if it was something that more people offer, it might be a bit more tricky, but for us, I think it wasn't too bad.
What's been your most effective marketing channel then through this period of time? Has it changed? And do you think because you've built a following for different products, that has helped you sell other products because you're not necessarily starting from scratch with an audience?
Oh, marketing. Always difficult. I left my headship in 2021, and that's when I started trying to sell to schools, but I didn't really use social media professionally. So I didn't have an account. I didn't have a following. I didn't have a network. So I joined Twitter because at the time it still had a good kind of edgy Twitter sphere, I suppose. So I joined Twitter and started trying to make connections that way. And that worked. I think that's how we first started getting things out. It was hard work because you are reaching out to people, trying to sell them something or trying to get something from them. So it was hard. And I wish I'd established that network a lot earlier. I think the thing that was really successful, you see, SLT AI was right place, right time. I know that's more luck than judgment, but I shared that to my limited followers on Twitter in kind of end of June 2023, but it was around the time that AI was in the media a lot. So it was jumping on the back of something that people were already interested in. So that was by far and away the biggest spark that kind of ignited it. And it's kind of rolled on since then. And then everything's been through organic growth. I think I mentioned earlier, we launched it as kind of an MVP. So then got a lot of feedback. So it generated quite a lot of conversations, and then people told their friends about it. And it's grown a lot like that. That said, we have tried a couple of marketing campaigns, kind of 2 blocks of 3 with a commercial company. And the first one worked okay. The second one didn't work at all. I don't know what made the second different to the first, and it was less effective, but it was for some reason. I don't know if people's habits have changed, but certainly cold emailing, as a head teacher, I was awful. I just deleted everything like that. Whereas now I'm like, oh, why won't people open my emails? And the challenges as well, we're a relatively cheap product. So one user, so say one head teacher, £95 a year. If you're spending £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 on a marketing campaign, you've got to convert a lot to get your money back. So that's always been something that we've struggled with because we tend to, the things that we have are relatively cheap. It's hard then to justify £5,000 to go to a conference when then we're going to have to sell to quite a lot of schools in quite a short period of time. We have started going to exhibitions as SLT AI. We're trying a few new things. It's a tricky one because it's a difficult product to share in a kind of exhibition booth type thing as people are walking past with a coffee. But I think the important thing is getting people to know your face. And that's where actually head teacher networks have been really useful. So where I did make those connections on social media and things, and actually then we've gone to meet in person, they've been the ones that have been really good, because then it establishes a network. Actually, people have a face to put with the name. You actually start to build up a relationship with these people. And that I find has worked. It's really dependent on the product though, isn't it? If I'm selling website audits or selling my services like that, I'm not going to go to an exhibition and have a booth for that. It's going to be a lot more about social media. It's going to be a lot more about emails and things like that. Something like SLT AI, it's a lot easier in that I can record product videos. You can offer free trials and bits, whereas it's hard to offer a free trial of your time. So the marketing has changed depending on the product that we've used. And, I don't think you can avoid it. I think social media is a place where you've got to go. And I think I still do have to send those emails, although they're getting harder and harder to actually encourage people to open them. As a head teacher, I must have had over 100 emails a day. It was ridiculous trying to kind of just triage things. But I think that's the way to go, and just trying to encourage people, figure out a way to get them to open it. Although, I'm 45 and I seem to have missed the Instagram boat. My wife keeps saying it should be something I look into, but I've never used it personally. I've got no idea how to use it. I don't know what it is. But I think that's where a lot of younger teachers, or, my wife's 43, so she uses Instagram. But I think that's where a lot of people do get those short kind of ideas. So actually things like that, I'd encourage people to have a go if they weren't as much like me. But I think that's where it's shifting now. I think I haven't used Twitter for a number of months now. So I think it's LinkedIn, Instagram, maybe a little Facebook. I'm not so sure about that. But I think Instagram and LinkedIn are probably the two where I'd put the most effort. One thing I did realize about marketing, and it was quite a hard lesson actually, the results aren't instant and they're not guaranteed. Originally I was quite naive about it, I think. And I talked about joining Twitter and starting there. And then, if one of my tweets was retweeted by someone with like 50,000 followers, I was like, oh, wow, the orders are going to roll in. And the marketing campaign I talked about earlier, one of the two that we did run, it involved emails being sent to 28,000 school leaders. So you were like, well, if we get 1% of those, that's kind of 280 orders. I expected them to be there the next day, wake up and all of a sudden hundreds of orders. It just doesn't work like that. And, it's quite demoralizing initially because I hadn't managed my expectations. I was really kind of naive about it and thought that the results would be immediate or really obvious. And they weren't. It's a much longer journey than that. And actually, you really do have to kind of nurture things. As I said earlier, I just used to delete these emails. So I was my own worst customer, but it is something that you can't get too disheartened about. And it's something that I've learned you have to persevere in it. Those emails become a sequence, don't they? So when you do have the contact details, I follow it with SLTO. We've got a number of people on our kind of mailing list that have either tried the product or were interested. And, they get fairly regular emails, but still yet to sign up. But, you keep drip feeding that information and eventually it might address a pain point that they have. But yeah, that was one thing I found quite hard at the beginning. I think it was a little demoralizing, but also it kind of dented your confidence a bit or made you think, will this work? Is it going to work? But I think a lot of it was down to kind of managing expectations, because when you do look at the statistics for kind of open rates on emails and then click-through rates and things like that, actually it is a real scattergun approach rather than, I send one person an email and they read it. Actually, you send thousands before someone might even open it. And that's well before someone's clicked it.
Thank you for being so generous with your insights there, Craig. It is difficult, isn't it? You don't know if it's going to work and you just have to keep trying new things. Even when you've grown your company, I think you can definitely fall into the trap of thinking, oh, we know how we're doing this now. We've definitely fallen into that trap before, but you're still in the same space where you have to keep figuring it out day after day after day. And that can feel quite exhausting, but I suppose it's just the nature of entrepreneurship. Just to close, I'd love to know from your perspective, what have we not talked about today that we should have talked about that education business owners should know?
That's a really good question. I think the only thing that we haven't really talked about too, which is the actual running a business. That was really daunting because I had no idea about it coming from a professional life in school. So what does it mean to run a business? But actually my advice to people would be, it's actually a lot easier than you think in terms of setting up as a sole trader or anything like that, or even as a limited company. These things aren't very daunting. They often come with minimal cost. They're easy to do. So I think that shouldn't be a barrier to people getting started. The other thing I'd say is systems. Get your systems in place. Try and make things as efficient as possible from the beginning. And I've fallen into this trap. I've started off with an idea and not really thought it through too much. And then when people have started ordering, I spend a lot of time doing admin, managing it when actually I could have automated that. And then it's more difficult to kind of build as an afterthought or add as an afterthought. So they're the kind of two things I'd encourage people to think about. Google's your friend in a lot of instances. As I think I said earlier, I'm a fan of learn by doing. So everything that we've set up, we've done ourselves. So it's been really low cost, so low kind of commitment, if that's the right word. I haven't had to invest thousands of pounds in a website or in accountants or things like that. So my advice would be just jump in, give it a go, set up as a sole trader, super easy, and then start selling. It's really easy. And then you just have to declare your profits on your self-assessment. There you go, you're self-employed. Easy. Have a go yourself. WordPress for your website, super cheap, all pretty straightforward, but very daunting when you don't know anything about it.
It is daunting, and that's why it took me so long to set up, because I remember talking to my mum about it, and she was worried that because she didn't know that then you could get yourself into loads of trouble. But actually, the information was there then, just like it is now. If you go on the government websites, you can read all about the information. But in some ways, I think what it is it's actually so simple, really, that we think there must be information missing, information that we don't know. Obviously, it's really cheap to set yourself up as a sole trader. It's also cheap to set yourself up as a limited company, although I did notice recently it's gone up to £100. So you have to be serious. You have to really think you're going to do something with that, especially if you're coming at it from nothing or you don't have a lot of money to invest in your company. So yeah, I think you're right. The actual running of a business, the automations, especially if you're not that way minded, can really slow you down. So it's worth having that in mind. You can save a lot of money and time that way as well, I think. Craig, thank you so much for being a brilliant guest on the Education Business Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Education Business Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets. To find more resources to grow your business, visit classroomsecrets.co.uk.